The first sound wasn't birdsong. It was chainsaws. At 6:15 a.m., the sharp metallic scream cut through my bedroom window like a knife. I jolted upright, heart hammering, convinced I was dreaming. But the steady growl, the ripping echo of wood, fibers being torn apart, it was real. I scrambled outside in nothing but an old t-shirt and flannel pajama pants. The morning air hit cold, damp from last night's drizzle. Then I saw it. My tree. The 100-year-old oak that shaded half my yard, the one I'd grown up climbing, the one my late father had hung a swing from when I was 10. A living piece of history, rooted in my family longer than any house I'd ever lived in. And now, two men in neon vests circled it like vultures, chainsaws biting deep into its bark, orange sawdust spraying across the grass like confetti at a funeral. The smell of exhaust mixed with the raw, wet scent of fresh-cut wood filled my lungs. My stomach churned, and standing there directing them, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like armor, was the HOA president, Veronica Hale. "Unauthorized tree," she said flatly, as if reading from scripture. "Violates Section 14 of the Landscaping Covenants. Roots are encroaching on community property." She didn't even glance at me. Her manicured hand gestured sharply, and the chainsaws roared louder. I felt my throat tighten. "That tree's been here a century," I said, my voice cracking. "It's not encroaching. It's part of this land." Veronica smirked, just enough for me to see it behind the mirrored lenses. Not anymore. A final crack split the air, like a rifle shot. The oak groaned, tilted, then slammed into the earth with a thunderous crash that shook the ground beneath my bare feet. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Some even stepped onto porches, sipping coffee, pretending not to watch the execution of my family's tree like it was just another HOA spectacle. The trunk lay shattered across the yard, branches clawing at the sky like broken arms. My swing, still tied to its lowest limb, dangled useless in the dirt. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. My chest felt hollow, like they'd carved me open with the same saws. "Cleanup will be billed to your account," Veronica said briskly, already walking away. Her perfume, something sharp and chemical, clung to the air like smoke after a fire. I just stood there, the ground wet under my toes, the acrid tang of sawdust clinging to the back of my throat. What would you do if your HOA cut down the one thing on your land that carried your family's memories? Tell me where you're watching from, because I guarantee you there's a Veronica in every neighborhood. My name is Daniel Whitaker, and 3 months ago, I thought buying into Oak Ridge Estates would be a fresh start. I'm 49 years old. Et civil engineer by trade. Divorced 5 years, no kids. My father passed away last year, and his will left me this parcel. 2 acres tucked at the edge of Oak Ridge. Bigger than most of the HOA's cookie-cutter lots, and with something they didn't have: history. That oak had stood long before the subdivision, long before the HOA bylaws printed on their cream-colored paper. It marked the corner of the old Whitaker farm, the land my family had held since 1910. I didn't buy this house for the HOA amenities, or the manicured lawns, or the promise of community living. I bought it because I wanted to protect what was left of my family's legacy. And now, the first thing they did was cut it down. See, Oak Ridge Estates wasn't just another subdivision. It was a power game. Homes worth 7 figures, dues high enough to choke you, and a board that treated the neighborhood like their personal kingdom. And at the center of it all, Veronica. 45, real estate broker, married to a surgeon who was rarely home. She drove a white Tesla with plates that read H8 Clutter. She wore pastel blazers like armor and sunglasses even in the shade. Her kingdom wasn't just lawns and fences, it was control. The targeting started almost immediately. The first violation notice came a week after I moved in. Unauthorized driveway gravel. Texture not compliant. Fine, $200 next week. Mailbox height non-standard. Fine, $150. Then, Tree branches encroaching common area. Fine. $300 each, notice crisp, printed on heavy paper, with the HOA logo embossed at the top like a royal seal. Each one slipped neatly into my mailbox like a summons from a judge. But I paid them. I thought I'd buy peace. I thought I'd blend in. Then came the oak. Veronica decided it didn't fit her vision of uniform aesthetics, and she brought in her contractors to erase it from existence without even knocking on my door. As I stood over the fallen trunk, something inside me hardened, because what Veronica didn't know, what no one in Oak Ridge knew, was that the tree wasn't the only thing my father left me, hidden in the records, buried in the property deeds. There was something else, something bigger, something that meant the street Veronica loved to strut down in her heels, the one she claimed to rule, didn't belong to her HOA. It belonged to me. And that's when I realized they thought they'd won. But cutting down my oak was just the beginning. The HOA didn't stop at the tree. Cutting it down was just their opening move. Within a week, I found myself drowning in violation notices. They claimed the mulch around my flower beds wasn't the right shade of brown. The paint on my shutters, which I'd chosen carefully to match the original colonial design of the house, was suddenly deemed non-compliant with community standards. Even the small bird feeder I'd hung outside for the chickadees and cardinals, something my wife and I had enjoyed for years, was branded an unauthorized structure. The notices came thick and fast, printed on that same expensive cream-colored paper with the HOA's logo embossed at the top, like it carried the weight of a federal agency. Each fine was $100 a day, stacking higher and higher until the numbers stopped making sense. Some neighbors avoided eye contact, as if talking to me might bring the HOA's wrath onto them. Others, braver ones, whispered their sympathy at the mailbox or while jogging past. They all knew Brenda and her board ran this neighborhood like a private fiefdom. I tried to appeal. I showed up at the monthly HOA meeting with photos of the tree stump, explaining how that oak had stood longer than any of us, and that my father and I had planted it together. Brenda sat at the head of the table in a cream blazer, sipping sparkling water through a glass straw, tapping her manicured nails against the wood. When I finished, she smiled in that tight fake way that said she'd already decided. "The board determined the tree was unsafe," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We're protecting community aesthetics. If you want to contest it, you'll need to hire legal counsel." That was their game. Drag you into court until you bled out financially. And they knew most people couldn't afford to fight. But what they didn't know was that I had leverage. The kind that didn't come from lawyers or rule books. See, when I bought this property, I didn't just purchase the lot with my house. Buried in the decades-old deed was something most people overlooked. A thin strip of land that stretched along the edge of the subdivision. At first glance, it looked useless, just a cracked old asphalt lane lined with faded streetlights. But when I took a closer look at the plat maps, I realized exactly what it was. That strip of land wasn't just any lane. It was the street the HOA used as their main entrance, the one with the decorative stone pillars and freshly planted flower beds, the one they maintained, paved, and decorated for every holiday. But legally, it was mine, not the HOA's, not the county's. Mine. At first, I didn't quite believe it. I went down to the county recorder's office and pulled every document I could find. The clerk, an older man with glasses perched on the tip of his nose, leaned over the counter and squinted at the yellowed paperwork. Then he gave me a slow grin. "Looks like you've got yourself something interesting here," he said. "This strip's been in limbo for years, and somehow it never transferred to the association. If your deed says it's yours, then it's yours." I walked out of that office with my hands trembling, clutching copies of the documents like they were treasure maps. For the first time since the tree came down, I felt something other than anger. I felt power. The next day, as Brenda strutted down the street with her little HOA entourage, clipboard in hand, I stood by my driveway watching. She gave me that smug smile and waved a violation notice in the air like she was delivering justice. But all I could think about was the secret I held. Every smug step she took, she was walking on my property. Every car that rolled past, every HOA meeting that welcomed newcomers through those stone pillars, all of it existed on ground they didn't own. And soon, I was going to remind them of that fact. I didn't rush in, guns blazing. That's how the HOA wanted me to act. Impulsive, angry, easy to paint as the problem neighbor. Instead, I played it slow, like a chess game. I started by putting up a small, unobtrusive sign at the entrance. Private property. Access by permission only. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, my phone buzzed with a call from Brenda. Her voice was sharp, clipped, as though she'd swallowed glass. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded. I almost laughed. For months she'd dictated every inch of my property, down to the color of my mulch, but now the shoe was on the other foot. Calmly, I told her the truth. The strip of road wasn't part of the HOA's domain. It was deeded to me. The silence on the line was golden. 2 days later, the HOA called an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but word travels fast in a neighborhood where gossip spreads like wildfire. From what I heard, panic had set in. The association's entire budget depended on maintaining that grand entrance. Without it, property values could dip, and Brenda's iron grip would start to slip. Meanwhile, I wasn't idle. I spent evenings walking the stretch of road, taking pictures of every crack, every neglected light post, every flower bed they'd planted without permission. My neighbors peeked from behind curtains as I paced the entrance with a clipboard, mirroring the same petty inspections Brenda had done on my property. Only this time, I was documenting their violations. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. The HOA had poured thousands of dollars into beautifying something they didn't own. That stone archway they bragged about in the newsletters? Built on my land. The irrigation system that watered their flowers. Installed on my dime, legally speaking. But the real moment of satisfaction came when a delivery truck clipped one of the decorative pillars and left a nasty crack down the side. The HOA sent me a furious letter demanding I fix it. I sent it back unopened with one note scrawled across the envelope. Not my responsibility. Yours. Trespassers maintain at their own risk. Brenda showed up at my doorstep that evening, dressed like she'd come straight from a real estate photo shoot, heels clicking against the pavement. She didn't knock so much as jab the doorbell like it had personally offended her. When I answered, she launched into a tirade about community, image, legal consequences, and how I was jeopardizing the integrity of Pinecrest Estates. I let her vent. Every word out of her mouth was fuel to the fire. When she finally paused, breathless and red-faced, I handed her a neatly bound packet. The deed, the plat maps, the county records, all proving my ownership beyond a shadow of a doubt. "You've spent years making my life miserable," I said evenly. "But every car that drives through here, every party your kids throw, every realtor tour you give, happens on my property. Maybe you should start asking permission." Her face drained of color. For once, the queen of the HOA had nothing to say. She clutched the paperwork like it was poison and stormed off without another word. That night, I sat on my porch and watched the headlights sweep across the road as neighbors came and went. I knew this was only the beginning. The HOA wasn't going to back down quietly. Brenda's pride alone wouldn't let her. But I wasn't just some grieving homeowner anymore. I had leverage, and for the first time, the board was about to learn what it felt like to live under someone else's rules. The following week, the HOA board doubled down. They sent me a letter on thick ivory paper with their logo embossed at the top, threatening legal action if I didn't remove the private property signs immediately. It was signed by every board member in neat cursive, as if their combined signatures would intimidate me into submission. but I wasn't rattled. I'd already spent hours at the county records office with the clerk, confirming the boundaries again and again. The land was mine, airtight. No amount of HOA bluster could rewrite that. Instead of caving, I leaned into it. I hired a local surveyor, the kind with neon vests and tripods, and had him mark every inch of the property line with tall fluorescent stakes. It wasn't subtle. Bright orange flags dotted the entrance like a construction zone, visible to every passing car. The effect was immediate. Neighbors slowed down, confused, whispering to each other as they realized the ground under their tires didn't belong to the HOA after all. Brenda must have nearly choked on her morning latte when she saw it. She showed up at the entrance the next day, barking at the surveyor, demanding he stop. He calmly pointed her to me. From my porch, I watched her flail her arms in the hot sun, red-faced and furious, while the surveyor hammered in the stakes one by one. It wasn't just about proving a point. It was about flipping the script. For months, she'd made me feel small, like I was living in her world. Now, with every stake planted, the truth became harder to ignore. The queen bee of the HOA had been building her empire on land she didn't control. Then I made my boldest move yet. I sent the HOA a formal letter stating that, effective immediately, anyone using the entrance needed written permission. No exceptions. I even attached a draft usage agreement with terms that made my neighbors snicker when they heard about it. A monthly maintenance fee, a liability waiver, and, just for fun, a $500 fine for unauthorized flower planting. The gossip spread like wildfire. At the mailbox, joggers stopped to ask me if it was true. At night, I could hear the murmur of conversations drifting from porch to porch, neighbors weighing their loyalty to Brenda against the reality of who really owned the road. Some quietly admitted they were rooting for me. Others confessed they'd always thought the HOA had too much power. The board tried to intimidate me with another round of violation notices, petty things like improperly stored garden hose and mailbox paint fading. I didn't even bother to open them. Instead, I taped them to the entrance pillars with a note. Invalid. Wrong jurisdiction. That one hit a nerve. The next HOA meeting was chaos from what I heard. Neighbors questioned why their fees were being wasted fighting a battle they couldn't win. Brenda tried to shout over them, insisting I was bluffing, but the documents I'd already circulated told a different story. One neighbor described the scene later, Brenda standing there in her designer heels, veins bulging in her neck, while a retired attorney from the neighborhood calmly pointed out that if the HOA kept pressing, they'd be trespassing every single day. For the first time, cracks began to form in Brenda's empire. People who once feared her were now questioning her judgment. And I knew if I kept pushing, those cracks would split wide open. That night, sitting on my porch, I ran my hand over the rough bark of the oak stump in my yard. They'd taken my tree, my memories, my peace of mind. But in trying to break me, they'd handed me the one thing they couldn't control, ownership of the very ground they strutted on, and I wasn't finished yet. By now the battle lines were drawn. The HOA had thrown everything at me, fines, threats, intimidation, but the weight of the deed was heavier than all their paper violations combined. They were stuck, and Brenda knew it. That's when she tried her last desperate card. Fear. Late one evening, just as the sun dipped below the rooftops and the cul-de-sac filled with that soft orange glow, I heard the low rumble of engines. 2 tow trucks, hired by the HOA, rolled up to the entrance. Their headlights washed over the stone pillars as men in reflective vests started unloading cones and barricades. At the center of it all was Brenda, directing them like some general in battle. Her plan was simple. Block the entrance, force the narrative, make it look like they still controlled the street. But what she didn't expect was me standing there with a folder tucked under my arm and a county sheriff's deputy by my side. I'd anticipated something like this. So earlier that day I filed a trespass warning. When the deputy stepped forward, badge catching the last light of the day, Brenda's face collapsed. She sputtered, insisting the road belonged to the HOA, but the deputy shook his head and held up the documents I'd provided. According to county records, ma'am, this land is deeded to him. That means you're trespassing. The tow trucks froze. The workers glanced at each other, then back at me. They weren't paid nearly enough to get caught in an HOA president's crusade. One by one, they packed up their cones and drove off, leaving Brenda fuming in the twilight. Her empire crumbled right there in the glow of my porch light. Word of the showdown spread fast. By the next HOA meeting, the board was fractured. Neighbors who once whispered their support now spoke it openly. A petition circulated, calling for Brenda's resignation. When I drove past the clubhouse that night, I saw her Range Rover parked. Outside, the lights blazing within, and voices raised so loud they spilled out into the street. A week later, Brenda was gone. Officially, she stepped down to focus on family matters. Unofficially, she'd been ousted. The same neighbors she once ruled over had turned on her, tired of her arrogance, tired of watching their fees vanish into legal battles they couldn't win. The new board reached out cautiously. They offered apologies, promises of cooperation, even reimbursement for the damage to my yard. I accepted some of it, not out of forgiveness, but because I knew the fight was finally over. The oak tree was gone, but in its place stood something stronger, the knowledge that I hadn't been powerless after all. On quiet evenings, I still sit on my porch and look toward the stump where the tree once stood. I think of my father, of the day we planted it, of the shade it gave, the birds it sheltered. And though the tree is no longer there, I imagine he'd be proud, not just of the oak, but of the way I stood my ground when others tried to cut me. Down, too. The HOA thought they could bully me into submission. Instead, they learned a lesson they'll never forget. Sometimes the smallest strip of land can turn the tide, and sometimes the neighbor they underestimate the most is the one who owns the very street beneath their feet.